Welcome back to part 2 of Patty Reed's Doll. Where I left off yesterday was they were preparing to become pioneers and journey to California from Springfield, Illinois. It wasn't long after the winter snow melted that activities began in the yard below. While Grandma and Mrs. Reed did great quantities of sewing indoors, preparations of a different sort were going on outside. We dolls, looking down from our seat at the upstairs window, judged that it must be a very long way to California by the amount of activity we saw. One day, 2 enormous wagons were drawn into the yard. Box after box of food was stowed away in them by Milt Elliott and Bayless Williams, the 2 hired men who were going with us. Big, good-natured Eliza Williams, our cook, was Bayless' sister, and she was going too. Other men were going to help drive the oxen and take care of the cattle. They were all down in the yard below us, packing the wagons and shouting remarks at one another. Mr. Reed stood by checking things off on his long list as they were hoisted into the wagon. Barrels of flour, cornmeal and sugar, rice, beans, peas, crackers, dried fruit, preserves, honey, vinegar, salt, ham, beef, and smoked fish. We dolls had no idea that people required so much food. Then there was other lists for Patty's father to check. Tools of all sorts, axes, hatchets, sickles to cut grass along drives. I heard them say to Milt. Spades, saws, nails, whetstones, tacks, needles, pins, thread, scissors, wax, sail, needle, twine, hammers, ropes, chains, beeswax, and tallow metal melted together for greasing shoes, rosin and tallow for wheels, guns, and bullets, molds and buds of lead to make the bullets. Oh dear, we were called. That's in case of Indian attacks. From time to time, other men who we gathered were taking their families to California, stopped by to see how the Reeds were coming along. You better plan to sell some of your horses and buy oxen, we heard Mr. Reed tell one of them. Horses are likely to stall in mud holes, and oxen can live off the grass on the way. Packing feed for the horses would take up too much of your wagon space. Hadn't thought of it in that way, the man said. Guess you're right, Mr. Reed. One morning, another stranger-looking wagon was drawn up in the yard. This must be the one we had heard the family refer to as the palace car. Mr. Reed was having it built especially comfortable for Grandma. It's to be our home on wheels, Patty told us. See, the door is on the side instead of the end, like the other wagons, and there are spring seats inside and a little iron stove to keep us warm. There's a stovepipe going up to the top, with a piece of tin around it to keep the sparks from falling on the canvas wagon top. And just look, it has 2 stories. Isn't that funny? A wagon with an upstairs and beds, a regular traveling house? Bedding and cooking utensils and clothes in big canvas sacks were put into the palace car. The Reeds didn't take any trunks. They're a useless weight, Patty's father said. But we dolls had our little hair trunk, as Patty promised, and although it contained mainly the fashionable gowns of my sister's dolls, I too had a few scraps tucked away in it, from which Patty had promised to make a few dresses as we traveled. At last, the day came for departure. It was the 14th of April, 1849, and I had heard Patty relate many times since then. The birds were singing in the lilac bushes outside our window, and spring flowers were blossoming in the yard of the big white house that we were leaving forever. Patty and Puss were dressed in their new linsey traveling suits, and I was safely cradled in Patty's pocket. Mr. Reed was dignified and handsome. I can't read. A black broadcloth, and Mrs. Reed was wearing her best paisley shawl and Sunday bonnet. The men led teams of oxen into the yard and yoked them to the wagons. Mr. Reed's mare, Glacus, was pawing the ground in Pussy's pony. Billy was prancing around in excitement as his mistress, relatives and neighbors were gathering to bid the Reeds goodbye. "Here, Margaret," we heard one lady say to Mrs. Reed, I brought you a looking glass. Hang it where you can take a peep at yourself now and then, so you won't forget to keep the good looks." Patty's mother laughingly thanked her and hung it opposite the door of the palace car. Soon there was great barking of the dogs and shouting as more wagons rolled up the road. Someone called out, "Here are the Donners!" Patty was a Reginus in the palace car by the time, and several other girls popped their heads in to see what was going on. "Oh, are you allowed to take all the dolls?" one of them asked Patty. "We could only take our best ones. We had to give the older ones away." I heard this and Mike was dismayed. "Dear me," I thought. "Is it possible Patty might have to leave me behind?" But I was soon reassured, God damn it, as she had sweared, as she has answered. "We have plenty of room for everything, and I wouldn't give any of my dolls away for anything." Her little hand closed around me and made me feel warm and secure. Never had we been in the midst of so many laughing and chattering and crying people. All of Patty's and Puss's schoolmates were there to kiss them goodbye. "What luck, kids," one little boy remarked. "I wish my folks were going to California." Uncle James and Uncle Gershon still tried to pursue Grandma to change her mind and remain with them as they lifted her into the feather bed in the palace car. But Grandma was as determined as ever to go a pioneering once again. At last the drivers, one by one, cracked their whips, and the oxen moved the wagons slowly out onto the road. Patty sat on Grandma's bed holding up the wagon flap as we could all have one last look at our old home and the cheering, waving people we were leaving behind. Through the streets of Springfield, Milt Elliott drove the palace car. "Milt," I heard Puss call as he rode by on Billy, "are you sure we can get the oxen to keep the wagon on the narrow bridge without reins? How can you make them go where you want them to?" Milt laughed and called back, "Don't you worry, Puss. Bully and George are the best pair of lead oxen in the party. They know what whoa and ha and gee mean as well as I do." Several of the family dogs were going with us, and they pranced proudly alongside the wagon, paying not the slightest attention as curious Springfield dogs came up to bark and sniff as we rolled by. "Are you comfortable, Grandma?" Grandma asked Patty. "Fine, child, fine," answered the old lady. Her eyes sparkled. I suppose she was remembering when she was Patty's age and staring on that other track down the wilderness road, and one which she had told us of so often. Jimmy and Tommy busied themselves inspecting the cupboards under the seats, pulling at the knobs and squatting down to peer into them inquisitively, and repeating 100 times, "What's this, Mommy? What's this?" "We won't travel far today, Mother," Mrs. Reed said to Grandma. "The men intend to set up camp just as they will when we get out on the plains. Besides, Jim and Gershom and some of the Donners' friends plan to ride out and camp with us for a farewell party tonight. Yes, they don't like the idea of their old mother going and pioneering at her age, but you know, I'll be happy with you, dear, as long as I last. How many of us there? How many of us are there, daughter?" 31, I believe," Mrs. Reed said. a good number for 3 families. The Donners are fine, quiet folks, quiet and sensible. They have some nice youngsters, too. Ours won't lack playmates. Mrs. George Donner planned to start a school in California. With 14 young ones in the party, it will be a lively crossing, I reckon, Grandma said. And that is the end of chapter 1. Look at them all. That's some of the party. That's the people waving goodbye as the party leaves for California. And then on chapter 2, we have a bunch of people singing. Although one child looks like he does not know what the hell is going on. I love these illustrations. These illustrations are like really nice. The first chapter 2, the first night out. We hadn't been long out of Springfield when the order to halt was called down the line. As soon as the palace car came to a stop, Patty, with me in her pocket, jumped out to watch the first camp making. The Donner children came tumbling out of the wagons, and with the dogs barking, the children shouting, and the cattle mooing and milling around, it's a wonder the men were able to get any order at all. They finally got the wagons arranged in a large circle in the grassy field where we had halted. The tongue of each wagon was drawn up close to the fire. No, let me try that again. The tongue of each wagon was drawn up close to the tailboard of the wagon ahead of it. Then the oxen was unyoked and led out to graze on the tender spring grass where the cows were already munching. Tents for the men to sleep in were pitched inside the circle. The women and children slept in the wagons. Back in the palace car, Eliza and Mrs. Reed were already fixing dinner just as though they were back home in their kitchen in Springfield. A little cook stove had been set up, and the smell of meat cooking and biscuits baking soon drew the children back to their home wagons. After dinner, we heard the thump of hooves on the dirt road, and more people from Springfield arrived. Uncle James and Uncle Gershom looked in to see how Grandma had liked her first day's journey. "It's as cozy a bedroom as a body would want," she told him. "They still think I'll give up and turn back with them," she whispered to Patty, after the 2 men had left to help with the bonfire that was being built outside. The editor of the Springfield paper was there talking to Mr. and Mrs. Reed about the condition of the roads through Illinois. "You must send back a full account of everything. There'll be plenty of folks hereabout who'll be anxious to follow you out next spring." "Sort of wish I was going myself," he said, and Mr. Reed promised to send back word by any they would meet who were returning. Everyone gathered around the high roaring bonfire, laughing and singing and telling stories, mostly about what wonderful land we are going to. California, where people were healthy and happy and flowers bloomed all the year around. Soon the youngest children were led back to the wagons and tucked into bed. Patty, and 12-year-old Leanna Donner, and the 2 14-year-olds, Puss and Ethla Donner, were allowed to stay up and sing songs with the grown-ups. But it had been a day full of excitement, and it wasn't long before Patty was yawning, and the mother, catching sight of her sleepy little daughter, motioned to her that it was bedtime. Grandma was still awake when Patty climbed back into the wagon, and she whispered to her as she was undressed, "Do you think they can see a bonfire back in Springfield, Grandma? I wouldn't doubt it, child, that there's many back there who are watching tonight and wishing us luck," the old lady said. And that's the end of chapter 2. You can see the wagon. Thank you so much for listening to me reading about Patty's doll. next video will be chapter 3, called From Springfield to Independence, which I think they refer to as Independence Trail. I could be wrong though. If we go back to the map, so they have left Springfield and are on Independence, Missouri. They are in Independence, Missouri. That's the next location in chapter 3. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you are going to enjoy me reading this book, because I loved this book when I was reading it on vacation. Yeah, I will talk to you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.